conversation about what doesn't work and what the issues are as well. And I think that's a really important part of any of these discussions. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. No, I'll be fine with this. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Just testing. Yep, got it. So I'm doing this because Mathew said I had to. Okay. I wanted to reflect a little bit on what Thomas has told us. I think what's a really important lesson is that in Finland it was a national initiative at a government level. And I think that's something that would be very difficult to carry out here in Australia, but it was essential to their success. I had the pleasure of visiting some of the schools where they were testing the ABITI system, and it was such a pleasure to see how familiar the Year 10 students were. We're just trooping into the classroom, sitting out at the computer, logging onto the network, and doing their exams on a computer. And when they get familiar with it from, say, Year 9, Year 10, when it goes into the important exams in what we would call Year 11 or Year 12, it's taken away a lot of the angst that our students have at university. And the last thing, Thomas didn't mention this, but he did in conversation at lunchtime, retailers of laptops in Finland are now badging their products as ABITI ready. You know, that's really important. And we actually need to put leverage onto manufacturers to say, we need you to provide computers that are ready for us to use for these kinds of assessments. Because, you know, if we don't assess people properly, you don't get good staff. That's what it comes down to. So thank you very much, Thomas. It's really good. Okay. So, in the time that I've been doing this, and I started doing this in 2006 in little bits and ways, it seems to me that there has become a growing tension between what administrators would like and what academics and students would like. So this is not to be stereotypical, but what we're doing is we're looking at the administrator's point of view of e-exams, and we're looking at what students and academics might like to see. So let's look at the story from both of their points of view. If you're an administrator, what is your driving force? Reduce costs. That's what it comes down to. You're trying to do the best job you possibly can with the least possible resources. And that's perhaps the driving force for you. That's not necessarily the driving force for students and academics. They are probably wanting to get the best and most efficient learning from the experience. And we would use like quality of learning, depth of learning, and pedagogy. So I've been trying to persuade my university, and they seem to be persuaded, that what we need to talk about is not making a business case for e-exams, but making an academic and a business case for e-exams. The two sides of the story need to be taken into account. So I have a lot of notes here about the administrator's side of the story. I've got some for the students and the administrators as well. So an administrator would perhaps look just at a business case. And there are sorts of things that I've listed here that they would like to see. So I remember going to an exams network conference a little while ago here in Melbourne. We were listening to one of the exam coordinators from RMIT, and she told me what I would call a horror story. She was saying, of course, the lecturer needs to prepare the exam paper. As lecturers, we all understand that. But you need to prepare another one, because some people are sick on the day of the exam, and they need to have a supplementary exam. Then, of course, there are some students who have special needs, and they may have to take the exam at a different time to everybody else because they're having a day in hospital on the day of the exam. And sometimes they have to take their exam in 2 or 3 lumps. I mean, your 6-hour exams, as you saw, surprised us. But sometimes they've taken a 3-hour exam as 3 1-hour exams. So that means that there needs to be a third paper. In fact, this particular exam coordinator was saying there was one lecturer, through a variety of circumstances, had to prepare for the same exam 11 different versions of the paper. And I was just kind of pulling my hair out. But from her point of view, she was just saying, oh, we've got another special needs student, you need to prepare another version of the paper, just like that. From the academic's point of view, that would be really hard, but from her administrative point of view, it was just part of what you had to do. So what she wanted to be able to do is to see the paper versions being prepared and coming into her system. Having got the question paper, or multiples thereof, the next job for the administrator is to organise for the printing. And an electronic system, one of the best things from their point of view is it eliminates the printing budget, it also eliminates the transporting of the papers, and it also transports or eliminates the answer papers, the answer scripts as well. So if you could do that through going on to e-exams, then the administrator would be very happy indeed. This idea that the candidates supply all the computer equipment, there are various opinions there. Some people say only if the institution provides the equipment can we be sure about security. And Philip Dawson, I think he was here at Monash when he wrote his paper, has exposed some ways in which computer exams might be cheated. I object to some of them. One of them required the computer to be frozen at -32 degrees centigrade. And, you know, it was feasibly possible. You could read the exam questions from the RAM after the exam, and different universities differ here. We, at the University of Tasmania, tend to publish the question papers a month after the exam. That's just our habit, and it's an lecturer's choice. In other universities, the questions themselves are sacrosanct, and if they were to get out, that would be a breach of integrity. So those sorts of things. Other things are much more difficult. There are apparently things called USB key injectors, which you can solder inside your computer and can pretend to be on the keyboard, and that would be much more difficult to support. But it does depend upon the operating system, which is where the systems that we're looking at provide a completely different operating system to what's installed on the computer. Electronic candidate identity verification. This is a real big one. I'm going to talk about the Tesla project in Europe in a minute. But I'll tell you a little story. I actually stood in to an exam at UTAS, a chemistry exam out of my subject area. And I just, casually asked the supervisors, have you ever found anybody masquerading? Oh, yes. There was that time where the student obviously hadn't mastered the material, so he sent his girlfriend to do, well, obviously the check by looking at the card sorted that one out. But there was one that was a bit more difficult. The student asked his father to take the exam, and of course there was quite strong facial resemblance. It was only when the supervisor checked the date of birth, you can't be 21, me. So we do have these problems of people doing this masquerading, and apparently there's a poster in our Sandy Bay campus that says, if you want help with your assignments, go to this shop in Sandy Bay in Hobart and they will, for a fee, help you out, it's all in Chinese, so I wouldn't have read it myself, but for those who wanted to access it, it was there. So if we could verify candidates, and Gabby talked about this in terms of candidate identity verification, if we could do that at a distance, actually it has wide-reaching implications, because it would mean that we could get the candidates to do their assessment at home. And that has these other benefits to the administrator. I mean, booking out the race course must cost them a quid or two, If we could save that amount of money, that would be huge. If we can make sure that all the scripts are sent around after the exam digitally, we have all kinds of advantages. We can send the same script to 2 or 3 markers to have simultaneous marking and moderation, so that speeds up the process. If we can send them as I do, why is it that you get tutors who just mention to you on the last day of semester, oh, by the way, I'm going on holiday to Queensland next week, but that's when the exam is, we need you to mark it, Oh, fine, I just email them the scripts. Just because they're by the pool doesn't mean they can't mark. I think Bruce might have had the similar sort of experience. And certainly we've had the argument that print is much easier to read than handwriting. And my tutors say that they can mark an e-exam with 25% less time than a handwritten exam. And when you multiply that over all the lectures and academics in a university, that's a lot of time, a lot of money that you could save if you're an administrator. Acquittal of candidate attendance, that's a really major thing for administrators. They need to be able to say with 100% certainty who appeared at the exam, who did the exam, who handed in a paper. And one of their problems is that retired school teachers and people like that are very often the people who do the supervision. And because they come in a new batch every year, they're having to be trained and paid for the training. So if they could eliminate that, an administrator's life would be rich. And they'd be able to get the boat out and go sailing. That would be ideal from an administrator's point of view, if we could get all of those benefits. Let's look now at the other side of the equation, the pedagogy. So once again, I've done a list of looking at it from the academic and the student's points of view. So we've talked about that idea of congruence between what happens in the real world, what happens in 21st century learning. A lot of it is computer-based. Your assessments are handed in as Word files or similar. And if you're using computers in your learning, then perhaps you should be using computers in your assessment as well. So that's a really big one. The professional learning environment, I train teachers, and most teachers, when they get a job in a school, the first thing that the institution gives them is a computer, because you need a computer to do your job. You're probably taking the roll call on computer, you're doing your assessments on computer of student progress, etc., etc. It's a tool of the trade, and it's a tool of most trades, engineering being particularly one of those where they use a computer. So I work alongside the Australian Maritime College, and they're looking to increase the number of engineers. We've got the new submarine building projects happening. We're training people for those. They won't be expected as engineers to do all the calculations about stress on the hull by hand. They would use a computer program. Why won't we give them an assessment environment which is matching that professional one? The students demonstrating learning achievement at higher cognitive levels. Let's say there are exams were done on paper and you had to have a pencil. No, let's go back a little bit. Some of you might remember this. Let's say, unfortunately, you can't have modern affordances. You'd have to use more ancient techniques. Let's give them quills and dipping pots to dip into the pens. You know, would you expect to get good quality assessment by going backwards in time in terms of writing technologies? Probably not. Certainly what I've found in my own research that students are very able to do things which are relating to modern technology and modern learning if they have a computer to assist them. So the project I'm talking about here is Calculus for Kids, where we taught primary school students how to do integral calculus. We gave them a computer tool to do the calculations, but the mathematics they were certainly able to do. And there's a push to bring Einsteinian Physics into the primary curriculum. It's not hard, it's been proven to work. How long since Einstein's equations were developed? Throw it to the floor. 1910, more than 100 years. It's taken more than 100 years to get something which is fundamental to our society, because each of your computers is basically using some of the results of Einstein's equations inside them, and it's still not taught in primary schools. So we are looking at the potential for assessment to drive curriculum change. I was very interested in Thomas's use of language. He was claiming that curriculum was maintaining and driving assessment, but I think assessment can drive curriculum as well. So that's another thing to take into account. We're obviously concerned that the assessment should be fair. That is, every student should have identical techniques and opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge. And when we get them to provide their own computers, some people say, oh, but that computer's bigger than mine, or has a bigger screen, or it works faster, and those sorts of things. And we need to provide an environment where everybody actually has the same kind of computer, and by booting externally, we can do that. We can make it so that for the duration of the assessment, the computer is actually controlled by the institution. And we do that with the exam system by providing a simple picture on the desktop on boot up. And if you haven't got that picture, if it's the dog or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, then you obviously haven't booted up into our environment. So we can check very quickly if you've got the right environment going. And we want it to be a rich environment. We do want them to be able to use those sophisticated tools and hand in, and perhaps even start off with a data file, which is quite rich, and hand in that data file as well. And we want to make sure that we maintain academic integrity. So what we want is something where there's no unauthorized communications, no Bluetooth, no Wi-Fi, or access to a USB drive with the answers plugged into it. So we want to avoid that. So these are the sorts of things that academics and students probably want. And so if we can succeed in all of those things, we get happy students. So we've got happy administrators on one side, sometimes pulling in one direction, happy students and academics on the other side. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get something where everybody could win? We want a solution that gives those academic benefits as well as the administrative benefits. So what I've done is pull out 4 e-exam systems, including the one that Mathew's now developed, and I just want to speak a little bit about each of those 4 possible solutions. So I won't talk about robust e-exams just yet, but I'll talk about the Tesla project. Have people heard of the Tesla project from Europe? Gabby has, because she's in Europe. So the Tesla project is the big European project with lots of international partners connecting together. So the basis is that a student goes into a trusted centre before the exam, and they have their photograph taken so that they can be identified by facial recognition. They speak or read out some sentences so that they can have a voice print so that they can be identified that way. And finally, they type some sample materials, and it's the time between striking one key and the next which is measured, and that apparently is pretty unique to each person. So with those 3 biometric markers, they can be pretty sure to identify people anywhere in the world as being of a particular person, a particular candidate. So the Tesla project is very much concentrating on identity management. It satisfies many of the administrators' dreams because you don't have to hire a venue. Students can do the exam when they want, but it connects into the local content management system. So the exam structure is not determined by Tesla. Tesla does the identity management. Responders. Put your hands up if your institution has responders. So there's quite a few people that have this already. It's about $6,000 a year if you want to have responders licensed for your institution, which is not a huge amount. It's basically a way of preparing a quiz and running it using a secure browser. The trouble is, although it's good for workflow, it's really limited to what you can put into your LMS and into a web browser in terms of pedagogy. So the sorts of things that we've been talking about using professional programs don't come up. And the last one is ExamSoft. So Exemplify are quite well known for providing this. They've provided some good technical solutions to the problems of networks. You download onto your computer as a student their software. It's a very intrusive piece of software. It has to go into all of the security settings of your computer to make sure that it's locked down during the exam any possible way of cheating. So that means it's got to collaborate with or overrule lots of other settings, which is a bit of a problem. You download the question file in an encrypted form before the exam. That's your problem as a student. You've got 24 hours to do it. And after the exam, you've got 24 hours to upload the encrypted answer file. There have been times when the exam soft servers have been overloaded, particularly during bar exams in America. They have obviously had to address those. And I'm not yet sure, Matthew, you might know, do they have an Australian server?
I don't know, but they offer it here.
They offer it here, but I suspect that you probably have to send your encrypted answer file to America before it comes back here for marking, which would be a problem, I think. And it's very costly. It's very costly indeed. So the robust e-exams is trying to be a bit of a best of both worlds. You're booting from a USB, you're connecting to the local content management system, but it's resilient to any network outages as well. So one of the things that Mathew's quite keen on are these three. Oh, this is the surprise one, wasn't it?
This was the surprise one.
Come on then, Mathew. You come and talk about this one.
I mean, in the spirit of, thinking carefully about where we go next, this previous slide about the technology matters, I think, does actually matter. Whatever solution you choose, there will be pros and cons to it. But, I mean, in my observations over the last couple of years of doing this work, here are some of the things that I think are perhaps things to watch out for. One of them, of course, is reliance on networks during the exam is a potential problem. Gabby seems to have got around that. We need to talk. But there are many systems out there that assume that the network is going to be reliable throughout the examination. Not in this country, thank you very much, from my experience anyway. The other one is that, just ask the Royal Australian College of Physicians that had the big exam meltdown earlier this year. I'm not quite sure what the cause was, but it died halfway through the exam. And the system relied on a live network connection being there all the time. It's sort of also connected to number two, bigger isn't always better in terms of the service providers saying, oh, we've done millions of them, we're a large corporation, right? Nobody is immune to technological problems, so I think you really have to do your due diligence on these things and think about where you're going to put your risk chips, as it were. Which things can you afford potentially to go wrong? Which things can you afford not to go wrong? So there's always going to be something in there. I put in there ethical conduct as well, because sometimes we get a little bit carried away with the technology. Now, the Tesla project sounds very interesting, but a massive database of everybody's personally identifiable biometrics, that must be a hacker's magnet, surely. Once that data is out, you can never get it back. So we also have to think about the ethical dimensions of what we're doing here. Fortunately, it sounds like in Austria, for example, you have laws against facial recognition, blah, blah, blah. In Australia, we don't have that. In fact, our governments have just stolen all of our identity photographs from our licences and other passports and stuck them into a massive facial recognition database. We weren't asked for that to happen. What's the implications for that into the future? We don't know. So, and as I always say, don't forget the pedagogy. We're educators at heart, right? As Andrew has been arguing, there's two sides to the story, right? And sure, we have to find a middle ground. But what I've observed in a lot of the computerised exam solutions out there is that the pedagogy tends to get forgotten, which is my next slide. So some of you have seen this floating around the country before. So I've sort of noticed this, there tends to be this tension. So Andrew's picked up on the pedagogy versus the administrator kind of tension, but I think there's a little bit more detail behind it in terms of how this might manifest in technology. So we've got authenticity. What we have been arguing for, I guess, is what we call good assessments, real world quality assessments. We've got the security angle of things, integrity, reliability, and we've also got the scalability. In Australia, at least in our university sector and indeed our school sector, we have very large classes or very large cohorts of students that we need to deal with. Now, our friends from Finland and Austria have demonstrated that this stuff can be done at scale. Right? Australia, of course, is have more population and more students. Our 70,000 in this university, and that's why we hire the entire racetrack, and that still doesn't meet our needs. But I've noticed there's this kind of tension happening here where it tends to be integrity and scalability have been, in general, as a rule of thumb, the focus of the commercial vendors, where authenticity of assessment tends to have been forgotten a little bit. Thank you. I'll go faster. So where's this good old thing? Good, quick, cheap, pick two. Have you ever heard of that one? Yes? The iron triangle of project management. Good, quick, cheap, pick two. Unfortunately, we tend to be losing good. Good assessment tends to be the loser so far. And this is why I think essentially the project team got together, because we want to inject a bit of good back into the equation, and hopefully we'll eventually be able to get all three satisfied. But I think I would argue that really good authentic e-assessment can't be sort of bought off the shelf, not yet anyway. Our friends from Austria and Finland are certainly helping us in that one. But I think we're almost done. I've got the time limit. Did you want to say anything about that, Andrew?
I just wondered whether you wanted to leave any time for a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Yep, or a couple of comments. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to say, we're hoping that this robust e-exams is the middle way, combining the best of both of the online testing and the e-exams that we've seen so far.
Yeah.
So questions?